Chris, I'm curious. He's a guy, he's a big idea guy, and he doesn't suffer fools gladly. If he had to do it over again, I know he'd never publicly say this, where he was after 8 years rather than the last 4, especially what he's used a lot of his capital for in the last 4, I mean both politically and personally, fighting guns nationally, with national ambitions, trying to change things. Do you think if he had to do it over again, if he had the benefit of hindsight, he would have run for that 3rd term?
Good question. I think there's 2 related questions there. Does he regret not running for president in 2008? And then would he do it over again to run for mayor in 2009? The presidential thing, he still wants to be president. He never wanted to run for president, and the rational side of him understood and understands why he really wouldn't have had a chance to win. But I think he regrets not going for it, actually. I don't think he regrets at all running for and winning a 3rd term as mayor. He, knows he, even with $27 billion in the bank, will never have the same power to try to affect change in ways he thinks are positive as when he's got the power and the bully pulpit of being mayor of the city of New York. People will still pay attention to him. He'll still make a difference, as of January 2nd. But being mayor is a power and a reach that you just can't duplicate. He knew that in 2008, 2009. He did really believe the city was in trouble, that we were heading into a horrendous recession. You call it ego or whatever you want, but he believed he was the best man to try to rescue or save the city at that juncture. No, with all the mistakes, whether you want to talk about the blizzard and the marathon or whatever it may be, I think he considers those blips that he certainly would run for a 3rd term again if he were doing it all over.
I think history probably will back that up. Interesting for me is I think some people, and you're closer to this probably than just about anybody, are taking some things for granted that they're going to get reintroduced, and there's no aspersions at de Blasio, in that we haven't talked for 12 years at all about conflicts of interest or what special interests are going to drive agendas of the mayor. I mean, he had more money than anybody. He didn't need anybody's money. He didn't need anybody's blessing. I mean, sure, there's some politics involved, but you never had to worry, even if the deputy mayors were on the take or whatever else, he paid them all so handsomely. But point is, tell people at home things that they haven't had to deal with for a dozen years that, whether it's de Blasio or anybody else, are going to be back on the table.
Right. Well, in simplest terms, you're right. The old phrase, too rich to steal, applied to Bloomberg and to some of his top deputies. He didn't have to, in simplest terms, he didn't have to raise money. He didn't have allegiances, favors that he owed to any sort of political organizations, though he needed them along the way to get things done. Yes, we reintroduce this past campaign and now going forward, all the elements, imperfect as they may be, of small d democracy in the city, where you've got to raise money, you've got to have union support to win the office and to move legislation. You don't cast aspersions on people's ethics in advance, I don't think, but there's a whole lot more opportunity for influence with that style than there was. It's not a conflict of interest, but in some ways, Bloomberg suffered from the same biases or influences. They were clear. He was going to back up Wall Street and big business, not because he needed their money or needed their electoral support necessarily, but because he just, they were his people. Blasio and other politicians, come from a much more values-driven or ideologically driven perspective that Bloomberg didn't have, and are subject, to the compromises and influences of all the other players in the system. We've seen it some here in the maneuvering for city council speaker, de Blasio was in there elbowing the various county leaders to try to get his choice, Melissa Mark Viverito, who has now, all but won the job. So that's the kind of horse trading, political favor trading that Bloomberg had to do a little of, but was insulated by his money, by his career, private industry life, that, we're going back to that. And a lot of people are excited about that. A lot of people feel that de Blasio reintroduces a grassroots participation, gives a voice to groups and neighborhoods that Bloomberg ignored because he could have. So if that's really true, and it's not the old sort of influence peddling side, that it's really, a more participatory democracy, it'll be a good thing.
Last thing, Chris, and that is his next act. I love, literally within, I think, a 2-day cycle, he says, I'm really going to sit on the sidelines and not criticize the incoming mayor, and I'm going to do everything, and then make sure there's a bunch of projects that A inherits, and then B talks about the differences basically between what the de Blasio era might look like versus the Bloomberg era. But will he be keeping a close eye on New York, or will other initiatives nationally, even globally, be where he's going to be spending his time on?
Both, yes. He's certainly going to pour money and time and effort into things like reducing obesity in Mexico. He's setting up a consulting firm that's going to take a bunch of his top aides from city government and teach others, mostly American cities, how to do it the New York way, whether it's parks or transportation or economic development. I think what we'll see, and we won't see Bloomberg more and less, if that makes sense. He won't be out there commenting, giving speeches about New York-specific issues in the way he has been as mayor, certainly. But his money, the way he's funded things, which has been an underreported thing all along, both how Bloomberg has written checks to underwrite education projects, poverty initiatives, museums, all that stuff. He's going to do that even more, and in New York and around the world. He won't be out there talking about it, but he will be exerting his influence through the channeling of those dollars in New York. What could get subtracted, Bloomberg has been a magnet for his fellow wealthy, pumping money into the school system and other projects. Governor's Island is a great example out in the harbor. If those people dial back their money, their contributions, their energy, that's a deficit that won't be quite as obvious, won't be nearly as obvious as a city budget, but could have a dramatic impact on what de Blasio is able to do.
Well, it has certainly been a fascinating 12 years here. And Chris, I appreciate a few minutes from you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.